This is, well, I suppose names don't matter much anymore, but for the sake of conversation, you can call me David. Broadcasting on 14.230 megahertz, shortwave. If you're hearing this, then you're alive, and that alone makes you remarkable. It's been 2,187 days since the sky turned gray. I've been counting, not because time matters the way it used to, but because counting gives me something to do with the silence. The silence it's everywhere now. It fills the spaces between heartbeats, between thoughts, between the moments when I remember what warmth felt like. I found this radio equipment 3 weeks ago, buried under 2 meters of ash snow in what used to be a civil defense bunker. The concrete walls are thick here, painted that institutional green that somehow survived when everything else faded to gray. The previous occupant left behind detailed logs, technical manuals, and a note that simply read, "Keep talking. Someone needs to hear a human voice." So here I am, talking to the static, hoping it reaches someone like you. The bunker's geothermal generator hums beneath my feet, a sound I've grown to love because it means power. And power means I can keep broadcasting. It's a deep, steady thrumming that vibrates through the metal flooring. Sometimes I place my hand flat against the floor just to feel that vibration, that proof that something in this world still works the way it was designed to work. The temperature gauge reads minus 14 degrees Celsius today. That's warm for this time of year, if we can still call it a time of year. The seasons have become something else entirely. We have cold, colder, and the brief periods I call almost warm, when the mercury climbs to minus 5 and you can actually feel your fingers inside your gloves. You need to understand what happened to our world. Not the war, that's over, finished, done. What matters is what came after. The scientists called it nuclear winter, but that term feels too clean, too clinical for what we're living through. This isn't winter. Winter implies an end, a spring to follow. This is something else entirely. When those weapons detonated across the globe, they didn't just destroy cities and lives. They lifted 150 million tons of soot and debris into the stratosphere. Picture that if you can, 150 million tons. That's the equivalent of throwing Mount Rushmore into the sky and leaving it there to circle the earth like a poisonous moon. That black cloud, suspended 15 to 20 kilometers above us, blocks 99% of the sun's radiation. The little light that filters through creates this perpetual twilight, this gray half-world where noon looks like dusk and dusk looks like the bottom of a well. I haven't seen a proper shadow in over 5 years. The global temperature dropped by an average of 13 degrees Celsius within the first 6 months. 13 degrees might not sound like much, but it's the difference between a world that supports life and a world that doesn't. The oceans began to freeze from the poles inward. Massive ice sheets formed where there had been warm currents. Photosynthesis nearly stopped. The food chain collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. I was in Sector 7, what used to be called the Pacific Northwest, when the first winter came. I remember standing in what had been a wheat field, watching ice crystals form on the withered stalks in July. The air tasted of metal and ash, like licking a battery while breathing through a dirty cloth. Birds fell from the sky, their bodies too weak to fight the cold. I found a robin frozen solid on my doorstep, its tiny claws still curved as if it had been trying to land when the cold took it. I haven't seen a bird in over 5 years now. The first year was chaos. Governments tried to maintain order. But how do you govern the end of the world? How do you enforce laws when the fundamental law of nature, that the sun rises and sets, that seasons change, that life goes on, has been broken? By month 18, the concept of nations had become as obsolete as the idea of summer. We don't have countries anymore. We have zones of survivability, measured in oxygen content, radiation levels, and UV exposure, Zone Green, that's where the lucky ones ended up. Deep bunkers with geothermal power, hydroponic farms, and air filtration systems that could clean the poison from the air before it reached human lungs. Maybe 2% of survivors made it to Zone Green facilities. These are the underground cities, the sealed biospheres, the places where small communities live in artificial light and breathe recycled air and pretend that civilization continues. Zone Yellow is where most of us live now. Underground shelters, caves, abandoned subways, basements sealed with plastic sheeting and duct tape. We have some protection from radiation and UV, but we venture to the surface for supplies. We wear oxygen masks and protective clothing, moving through the silent neighborhoods like ghosts visiting a graveyard. The air tastes like copper pennies and burnt plastic, and even with filtration, you can feel it burning your throat with each breath. Zone Red is the surface world, the dead world. The UV radiation there will cook your DNA in hours without proper shielding. The air is thin and toxic, filled with particles that will shred your lungs from the inside. Nothing grows, nothing lives. It's where our old world went to die, street by street, building by building, dream by dream. I spend my days in Zone Yellow, my nights here in the bunker. The routine keeps me sane. Morning, if we can call it morning when the sky never changes, I eat my ration of fungal protein. It comes in gray blocks that crumble like stale cake and taste like absolutely nothing. The cultivation labs in the lower levels grow these engineered molds on recycled organic matter. They break down everything, old newspapers, wood scraps, fabric, and transform it into something that will keep you alive another day. I dream sometimes of apples, of their crisp sweetness, and the way juice would run down your chin when you bit into one. I dream of bread fresh from the oven, of coffee that actually smelled like coffee instead of burnt chemicals. I wake up with tears frozen to my cheeks and the taste of nothing in my mouth. After breakfast, I check the atmospheric readings. Radiation levels fluctuate based on wind patterns and the settling of particles. Air quality depends on temperature inversions and the movement of toxic clouds. Temperature gradients tell me whether it's safe to venture outside or if I should stay sealed in the bunker for another day. These readings are my Bible now, more important than any weather forecast ever was in the old world. Then I venture topside for scavenging runs. The surface is a museum of stopped time. Cars frozen mid-journey, their windows coated with ash so thick you can write your name in it. Storefronts with sale signs still promising better days, 50% off spring fashions, in a world where spring will never come again. Children's toys scattered in yards where the snow never melts, slowly being buried beneath layers of toxic precipitation. The silence up there isn't just the absence of sound, it's the presence of emptiness, the weight of all the voices that will never speak again. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, no wind rustling through leaves because there are no leaves left to rustle. Even the wind seems muffled, as if the air itself has become too thick with ash and poison to carry sound properly. I found an elementary school last week. The clocks had stopped at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, 6 years ago. You could tell it was a Tuesday because the lunch menu was still posted on the cafeteria wall. Tuesday means fish sticks and applesauce. The cafeteria still smelled faintly of old milk and disinfectant, odors so normal and familiar that they hit me like a physical blow. In one classroom, autumn leaves had been taped to the windows as decorations. Brown and gold reminders of a season that will never come again. 24 little desks arranged in perfect rows, each one with a nameplate written in careful teacher handwriting. Jessica, Marcus, Aiden, Sophia. 24 children who should be teenagers now, who should be worried about homework and friendships and whether they'll pass their driving test. I sat in one of those tiny chairs, my knees folded up almost to my chin, and cried for 20 minutes before I remembered that tears freeze in this cold. They crystallize on your face and hurt when you try to wipe them away. But sometimes you need to cry anyway, even if it hurts, because the alternative is forgetting how to feel anything at all. The silence in those places isn't just the absence of sound. It's the presence of all the conversations that should be happening, all the laughter that should echo off the walls, all the ordinary chaos of human life that has been erased as completely as if it never existed. I've started talking to myself during these excursions, just to hear a human voice echo off the walls, just to prove that voices still exist in this world. But I'm not the only one out here. I know because I've found signs. Fresh footprints in the ash snow, sometimes days old but still visible in this windless world. The prints are always careful, deliberate, following the safest paths through the ruins. Emergency shelters with recently used supplies, empty cans arranged in neat piles, sleeping bags still warm to the touch, chemical heat packs that haven't fully cooled, radio frequencies that carry brief transmissions, coordinates scratched out in Morse code, supply cache locations, sometimes just a voice counting numbers from 1 to 10 and back again, proving they're still alive, proving they haven't forgotten how to speak. I've heard people broadcasting recipes, reading poetry, humming half-remembered songs. Each transmission is a small miracle, proof that humanity persists even in the darkest places. 3 months ago, I heard a woman singing on frequency 18.150, just humming at first, something that might have been a lullaby, then full lyrics to a song about sunshine and rainbows and better days. Her voice was clear and sweet, untouched by the harshness that comes from breathing filtered air for years. I tried to respond, but by the time I got my equipment ready, she was gone. Static filled the frequency like water rushing into an empty space. I've monitored that frequency every day since. Sometimes I think I hear breathing in the static, the soft rhythm of someone listening, waiting, hoping for a response. But it might just be wishful thinking, the mind's desperate attempt to find patterns in randomness, to discover meaning in meaninglessness. The loneliness is the hardest part. Humans weren't meant to live in isolation. We're social creatures, designed for connection, community, conversation. Our brains require social interaction the way our bodies require water and food. Without it, the mind starts to fracture. Thoughts become circular, repetitive. Memories begin to blur together until you can't remember if something happened yesterday or 6 years ago. I've caught myself having full conversations with mannequins in abandoned stores, arguing with traffic lights that will never change again, apologizing to empty houses for disturbing their silence. Last week, I spent an entire afternoon talking to a parking meter, explaining the current situation as if it were a visiting alien who needed to understand what had happened to Earth. That's why I'm broadcasting. Not because I expect rescue. There's no one left to mount a rescue. The governments that might have organized such operations are gone, scattered like ash on the wind. Not because I have some grand message to share. I'm just a survivor like you, stumbling through each day, trying to remember what it means to be human. I'm broadcasting because somewhere out there, in another bunker, another shelter, another zone yellow hideout, someone might be listening. Someone might hear my voice cutting through the static and remember they're not alone in this gray world. Someone might realize that despite everything we've lost, we haven't lost each other completely. Not yet. The old world is gone. The blue skies that stretch from horizon to horizon, the warm summers that made you sleepy in the afternoon, the green forests that turned the air sweet with oxygen, they're memories now, fading a little more each day like photographs left in sunlight. But we're still here. We adapted, we survived, we endure. That has to count for something. That has to mean something. My oxygen meter is beeping. Time for me to change filters and check the air recycling system. The filters turn black within hours now, clogged with particles that would destroy my lungs if they ever reached them. Before I go, I want you to know something. If you're listening to this, if my voice has reached you across the static and the distance and the crushing weight of this broken world, then you've done something incredible. You've survived the unsurvivable. You've found hope in a hopeless world. You've maintained your humanity when everything around you has become inhuman. You've chosen to keep listening when silence would be easier. Chosen to keep hoping when despair would be simpler. Keep listening. I'll be back tomorrow at the same time, assuming the generator holds and the equipment doesn't fail, and I don't make some stupid mistake that costs me my life. I've got more stories to tell, more of this world to share, because as long as we're still talking, still listening, still reaching out across the void, then humanity hasn't truly ended. We're still here. We're still human. Stay warm, stay safe, and remember, you're not alone in the dark. Somewhere out there, other voices are calling through the static. Other hearts are beating in time with yours. Other minds are holding on to the dream that someday, somehow, the sun might break through the gray again. Until tomorrow, this is David, signing off from day 2187 of the New World. Hello again. This is David, day 2188 since the sky closed. The generator is humming a little differently today, a higher pitch that makes me nervous, but it's holding steady. If you're listening, if you've tuned in again, then welcome back. Your presence, even invisible, even unknowable, gives this gray world a little color. I want to talk about light today, not the weak, filtered glow that passes for daylight in our world, but real light, sunlight, the kind that warmed your skin and made shadows sharp and clear and moved across the ground as the hours passed. Do you remember shadows? Crisp, dark outlines that danced on sidewalks, that shortened at noon and stretched long in the evening, that told you the time without looking at a clock? I dream about shadows sometimes. In my dreams, I'm standing in a field, and I can see my shadow stretching out beside me, solid and reassuring. I move my arms and watch my shadow move too, this dark twin that proved I existed in a world full of light. When I wake up, I hold my hand up to the bunker's artificial lighting and see only the faintest outline on the wall, a pale suggestion of what a shadow used to be. This morning, and I use that term generously since there's no real morning anymore, just slightly less dark periods when the atmospheric readings show a tiny uptick in light levels, I climbed to the surface and stood in what used to be a city park. The ash snow came up to my knees, and through it, I could see the ghostly outlines of playground equipment. A swing set, its chains frozen solid, hung motionless in the still air. The swings themselves were buried, just the top chain links visible like the ribs of some enormous skeleton. I pulled out my UV meter and watched the needle barely twitch. Less than 1% of normal solar radiation reaches us now. 1%. Imagine if your paycheck was suddenly reduced to 1% of what it used to be, and you'll understand what happened to life on Earth. That 150 million tons of soot and debris I mentioned yesterday, it's still up there, still circling the globe in the stratosphere like a funeral shroud, still choking out the sun. The particles are so fine, they don't settle the way normal dust would. They're suspended in the upper atmosphere, caught in wind currents that circle the planet. Some climate models I found in an abandoned university library suggest it could take another decade before we see any significant improvement. A decade. That means children born today might be teenagers before they ever see blue sky. But here's what the models couldn't predict: how we'd adapt, how life finds a way, even in the darkest places. How evolution doesn't wait for perfect conditions, but works with whatever it gets. I've discovered that some plants have survived, not many, and they're nothing like what we remember, but they're alive, and that's something close to miraculous. In the lower levels of collapsed buildings, where geothermal vents create pockets of warmth, I've found fungi and mosses that have learned to live without photosynthesis. They feed on organic matter, on the debris of the old world, breaking down everything from wooden furniture to paper books to the bodies of trees that died in the first winter. They've become the decomposers of our former civilization, turning everything we built into nutrients for whatever comes next. There's a strange beauty in these new ecosystems. Bioluminescent fungi that glow with a pale blue light, providing the only natural illumination in our underground world. I found a colony of them last week in an abandoned subway tunnel, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt magical, like fairy lights in a children's story, like something from a world where wonder still existed. The colony covered nearly 50 square meters of tunnel wall, pulsing with soft blue radiance. When I approached, the light seemed to respond, growing brighter as if sensing my presence. I turned off my flashlight and stood in that alien glow, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was seeing something beautiful instead of just surviving something terrible. I've started collecting photographs of these bioluminescent gardens, not to share, there's no one to share them with, but to remind myself that beauty hasn't completely disappeared from the world. It's just wearing a different face now, adapted to conditions we never imagined life could survive. The animals that survived have changed too, and in ways that would have taken millions of years in the old world. I've seen rats that have grown thicker fur, almost like tiny bears. Their coats are so dense, they look like living pom-poms scurrying through the ruins. Their eyes have grown larger to capture what little light exists, giving them an alien appearance that's somehow both disturbing and endearing. Some have developed better hearing to navigate in near total darkness. I watched one the other day navigate through the debris field using only sound, its oversized ears twitching and turning like tiny radar dishes. Evolution in fast forward, adaptation driven by desperation, natural selection compressed into years instead of millennia. The cats that remain have become something else entirely. Leaner, more elongated, with fur that's almost white to blend with the ash snow. They move like ghosts through the ruins, silent and watchful. I saw one stalking a rat colony last month, and it moved without sound, without even disturbing the ash beneath its feet. Perfect predators for a world that demands silence. But the most remarkable adaptation is happening in us, the human survivors. Our night vision has improved significantly. I can navigate the bunker now without artificial light, my eyes automatically adjusting to the faintest glow from indicator lights and emergency beacons. Our hearing has become more acute. I can identify footsteps in the ash snow from hundreds of meters away, can tell by the sound whether someone is wearing heavy boots or improvised foot coverings. We've learned to read the subtle changes in air pressure that tell us when weather is shifting, when radiation levels are spiking, when it's safe to venture outside our shelters. My body knows when a storm is coming, hours before my instruments detect it. Some primal part of my brain has reactivated, the part that kept our ancestors alive when the world was dangerous and unpredictable. We've also developed new languages, not just the radio codes I mentioned yesterday, but physical communication systems. Touch patterns tapped against walls or pipes, vibration signals that can travel through metal infrastructure for kilometers. I've learned to read the subtle changes in how metal sounds when tapped. Different pitches indicate different types of urgent messages. Scent markers too, for those brave enough to remove their masks briefly in relatively safe areas. Different combinations of materials leave different odors that can communicate basic information. Safe passage, danger, supplies available, help needed. Communication born from necessity, from the fundamental human need to connect even when connection seems impossible. I met another survivor 2 weeks ago, the first human contact I've had in over 8 months. The isolation had gotten so complete that when I first heard human footsteps, I thought I might be hallucinating. I was scavenging in what used to be a medical district when I heard footsteps echoing through an empty hospital corridor. My heart nearly stopped. In this world, unexpected sounds usually mean danger. Other survivors aren't always friendly, and desperation can make people do terrible things. But it was just another scavenger, a woman maybe 40 years old, though it's hard to tell ages now. Malnutrition and vitamin D deficiency make everyone look older, more fragile, like photographs that have been left in the sun too long. She wore the standard gear, oxygen mask, radiation badge, thick layers of whatever clothing she could find. Mismatched boots, a coat that had probably been 3 different colors before the ash stained everything gray. Her eyes above the mask were the palest blue I'd ever seen, like chips of ice or winter sky from the old world. They were alert, cautious, but not hostile. When you've been alone as long as we have, you can read a lot in someone's eyes. Fear, hope, desperation, madness, it's all there in the windows to the soul, as they used to say. We didn't speak at first. Trust is a luxury we can't afford, and voices carry in empty buildings. Sound travels differently in this world, echoing off walls that used to absorb it when they were filled with people and furniture and life. Instead, we worked parallel to each other, searching different wings of the hospital for medical supplies. She took the east wing, I took the west. Professional courtesy among scavengers. She found antibiotics in a locked pharmacy cabinet. I found a working blood pressure monitor and several boxes of surgical gloves. We met back in the main lobby and compared our finds without speaking, each of us evaluating whether the other posed a threat or an opportunity. After an hour of this careful dance, she tapped her gloved finger against a metal cabinet. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. SOS in Morse code. I tapped back. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The old distress signal, but in our context it meant something different. It meant, I acknowledge you, I see you, you're not alone. It meant we were both human beings in a world that had tried to strip away our humanity, and we recognized that shared condition. We spent the rest of the day together, sharing the unspoken protocols of survival. She showed me how she'd modified her oxygen filtration system to last longer between filter changes, a simple valve adjustment that could extend filter life by 30%. I shared my technique for testing food for contamination using a simple chemical strip test I'd salvaged from a high school chemistry lab. When we parted ways, going to different zones, following different survival strategies, she pressed something into my gloved hand, a small photograph, creased and faded, of a little girl with curly hair and a missing tooth, grinning at the camera with the pure joy that only children possess. On the back, written in careful block letters, Emma, age 6, first day of school. I still carry that photograph, not because I knew Emma or the woman who gave it to me, but because it represents something powerful. It's proof that before the fall, there was joy, there was hope. There were first days of school and lost teeth and proud parents taking pictures of ordinary, beautiful moments that seemed so permanent we thought they would last forever. The psychological effects of our new world are perhaps the most challenging aspect of survival. Without natural light cycles, our circadian rhythms have completely broken down. The human body is designed to respond to the rising and setting of the sun, to the gradual changes in light throughout the day. Take that away, and you're left with a biological system that doesn't know when to be awake or asleep, when to be alert or at rest. I sleep when I'm exhausted, wake when my body can't rest anymore. Sometimes I'm awake for 30 hours straight, my mind racing with thoughts and memories and plans that may never come to fruition. Sometimes I sleep for 15 hours and wake up more tired than when I went to bed. There's no pattern, no rhythm, no anchor to normal human biology. Memory becomes unreliable too. Without the structure of normal time, past and present blur together like watercolors in the rain. I'll be eating my morning ration of fungal protein and suddenly taste pancakes with maple syrup, so real I can feel the warmth of them on my tongue. I'll be checking radiation levels and hear my daughter's laughter echoing down empty corridors, clear as if she were standing right beside me. These sensory hallucinations are common among long-term survivors. I've read about them in medical journals I've found in abandoned libraries. The mind's attempt to fill the void left by a world stripped of sensory input. When you're surrounded by gray and silence and the taste of nothing, your brain starts creating its own experiences to maintain some semblance of normal human consciousness. Some survivors have developed what psychologists used to call phantom memory syndrome. They remember things that never happened, family gatherings that occurred after the fall, conversations with people who died years ago, trips to places that no longer exist. The brain, desperate for normalcy, creates false memories to replace the traumatic reality. I've caught myself doing this. Last month, I spent an entire day convinced I had a conversation with my neighbor about borrowing a lawnmower. I could remember every detail, what he was wearing, the smell of his aftershave. It wasn't until I tried to find his house that I remembered he died in the first winter. I fight this by keeping detailed journals, by recording these broadcasts, by maintaining rigid documentation of daily activities. Reality anchors, I call them. Points of reference to remind myself what's real and what's wishful thinking. I write down everything, what I ate, where I went, what I found, what I thought about. The act of writing makes things real in a way that just thinking about them doesn't. But perhaps the most profound change is in how we value things. In the old world, we collected possessions, accumulated wealth, competed for status symbols that meant nothing in the face of actual survival. We worried about the stock market, about property values, about whether our cars were new enough or our clothes fashionable enough. Now the most valuable things are intangible. Knowledge, skills, stories, the ability to repair equipment with improvised tools, the memory of how things used to taste, used to smell, used to feel, the capacity to maintain hope when everything seems hopeless, to find beauty in bioluminescent fungi and meaning in static-filled radio transmissions. I've learned to repair electronics with nothing but salvaged parts and intuition. I can identify 17 different types of edible mold by sight and smell. I know which buildings are most likely to have intact supplies, which routes through the dead cities are safest, which radio frequencies are most likely to carry human voices across the wasteland. But the most valuable thing I've learned is the importance of ritual, of maintaining humanity in an inhuman world. Every morning, I make my fungal protein ration into the shape of a pancake, no matter how ridiculous it looks. I use a fork to eat it, even though my fingers would be more efficient. I say good morning to the empty bunker, just to hear polite words spoken aloud. Every evening, I spend 5 minutes looking at photographs I've collected from abandoned homes. Not because I knew these people, but because I need to remember that love existed, that families existed, that there was once beauty in ordinary life. Wedding photos, baby pictures, birthday parties, graduation ceremonies, evidence of a world where people celebrated each other, where happiness was common enough to photograph. I've started a small garden in one of the bunker's lower chambers. I know nothing will survive. The soil is contaminated, the light is artificial and insufficient, the air is processed and sterile. But I keep planting seeds anyway. Not because I expect them to grow, but because the act of planting represents faith in the future. Hope that someday, somehow, things might grow again. Last week I planted tomato seeds I found in an abandoned garden center. They're probably dead already, probably never had a chance, but I water them with recycled condensation and talk to them like they might listen. I tell them about the old world, about sunshine and rain, and the feeling of dirt under your fingernails when you worked in a real garden with real hope for real harvest. This is David, signing off from day 2188. The light may be gone, but we remain, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Hello again, this is David, day 2189 since the sky closed. The generator's been making that strange sound all day, and I've had to switch to backup power twice. If you're listening, stay close to your radio. I need to tell you about something that happened yesterday, something that changed everything I thought I knew about survival in this new world. Not everyone out here is just trying to survive. Some have chosen a different path, and that path leads through the darkest parts of what we've become. I'm talking about the hunters, and if you're out there in Zone Yellow or anywhere near the surface, you need to know about them. I was following my usual scavenging route through the medical district when I found the markers. At first, I thought they were just random scratches on a wall, 3 parallel lines carved deep into concrete, each about 15 centimeters long. But then I found more. Same pattern, same depth, carved into lampposts and building walls, and even scraped into the frozen ground. Someone was marking territory. The scratches were fresh. In this world, you learn to read the age of disturbances in the ash snow like a tracker reading footprints. These marks had been made within the last 48 hours, and whoever made them had sharp tools and plenty of time. That combination should have warned me off immediately. But curiosity has always been my weakness. I followed the trail of markers for 2 kilometers, deeper into the dead zone than I'd ever ventured. The radiation levels were climbing, but still within acceptable limits for short-term exposure. The silence grew thicker, more oppressive, until even my own breathing seemed too loud. And then I smelled it, the unmistakable scent of burning meat. In a world where protein is precious beyond measure, where every calorie might be the difference between life and death, the smell of cooking flesh draws you like a magnet. My stomach clenched with hunger so sharp it felt like being stabbed from the inside. I hadn't eaten real meat in over 3 years. I crept toward the source of the smell, using the ruins of an overturned bus for cover. What I saw in that clearing will haunt me until the day I die, which might be sooner than I'd like, given what I learned yesterday. 4 people sat around a small fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. They wore better gear than any survivor I'd ever seen. Matching radiation suits, professional-grade filtration masks, military-style boots that looked almost new. But it wasn't their equipment that made my blood freeze. It was the conversation I overheard. The leader, a tall man with pale skin and dead eyes, spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the still air. The settlement in Sector 12 is down to 18 people. Should be easy pickings. We can take their supplies and eliminate the competition for territory. Another voice, a woman with scars covering half her face, laughed. It was a sound like breaking glass, sharp and wrong in this silent world. These isolated groups always think they can survive alone. They never see us coming until it's too late. I realized with growing horror that these weren't desperate survivors struggling to live. These were organized predators who had turned hunting other humans into their primary means of survival. They called themselves the Feast, but their appetite wasn't for food. It was for power, territory, and the supplies that other survivors had worked so hard to gather. I've heard stories about groups like this, whispered rumors on the radio frequencies that survivors monitor. They call themselves the Feast, and they've turned raiding other settlements into an organized operation. They track survivor communities, study their defenses, plan their attacks like military operations to steal resources and eliminate competition. But hearing about them and seeing them are two very different things. As I watched in horror, frozen by fear and revulsion, the leader pulled out a detailed map marked with red X's. Each X represented a settlement, and many had been crossed out with black ink. Beside each marking were numbers, population counts, defensive capabilities, estimated resistance levels. They had turned survival into a business plan, and we were the inventory. The woman with the scars pointed to a location I recognized. What about the bunker complex in the old subway system? Reports say there might be 30 people there, plus stored supplies. Too well defended, the leader replied, folding the map carefully. We'll save that for when we have more members. For now, we stick to easy targets. The weak, the isolated, the ones who still believe in human decency. I tried to back away quietly, but my foot struck a piece of debris. The sound was small, just a soft scrape of metal against concrete, but in that dead world, it might as well have been a gunshot. 4 heads turned toward my hiding place with predatory focus. We have a visitor, the leader said calmly, standing and reaching for something at his belt. Someone's been watching our little dinner party. I ran. Not the careful, quiet movement that survival in this world demands, but pure panicked flight through the ruins. Behind me, I heard them giving chase, their footsteps coordinated and confident. These weren't desperate scavengers stumbling through the dark. These were experienced hunters who knew their territory. The chase lasted 20 minutes. That felt like 20 hours. They herded me like wolves driving prey, cutting off escape routes, forcing me toward dead ends where they could corner me. I only escaped because I knew a route through a collapsed department store that required crawling through spaces too narrow for their bulky equipment. I made it back to the bunker, but barely. My radiation badge was flashing yellow, dangerously high exposure from running through the hot zones. But the physical danger was nothing compared to the psychological impact of what I'd witnessed. There are people out there who have embraced the worst aspects of this new world, who have turned our struggle for survival into their opportunity for predation. Since that day, I've been monitoring their radio frequencies. They use encrypted communications, but some of their transmissions leak through on standard bands. What I've learned terrifies me more than radiation, more than starvation, more than the slow death of our world. The Feast isn't the only group that's turned to evil. There are the Shepherds, who capture survivors and force them into slave labor, building elaborate underground complexes for their leaders, while the workers die from exhaustion and exposure. There are the Cleaners, who believe that the nuclear winter was nature's way of purging the world of the unworthy, and who hunt down anyone they consider genetically inferior. But perhaps most chilling are the Silence Keepers, a cult that believes human voices anger the dead world, that speaking aloud brings punishment from whatever force destroyed our sky. I've found their victims wandering the ruins, mute and traumatized, drawing desperate messages in the ash snow with trembling fingers. These groups have turned the wasteland into hunting grounds, with ordinary survivors as their targets for raids and resource theft. They've organized into militarized units with ranks, territories, and sophisticated communication networks. While most of us struggle just to find clean water and edible food, they've built an entire society based on exploitation and taking what others have worked to gather. Yesterday's encounter taught me that isolation might be safer than community in this new world. The very thing that keeps us human, our desire to connect with others, has become our greatest vulnerability. Every radio transmission, every signal fire, every call for help is potentially a beacon for predators who view compassion as weakness and cooperation as opportunity. But I'm still broadcasting, still reaching out across the static, because if we let fear silence us completely, if we stop trying to maintain human connection, then we've lost more than our civilization. We've lost our souls. And that would be a victory for the hunters that I refuse to give them. The radiation levels are spiking again, another contaminated weather front moving through. Time to seal the bunker and wait for it to pass. Tomorrow I'll tell you about the war that's raging beneath our feet, about the groups that have claimed the underground territories and turned the old world's infrastructure into their battleground. Stay hidden, stay quiet, and if you hear voices in the night claiming to offer help or shelter, remember what I've told you. In this world, the most dangerous predators are the ones that still look human. This is David, signing off from day 2189. Trust carefully, and never forget, not all survivors survived with their humanity intact. This is David, day 2190 since the sky closed. The contaminated front passed through last night, leaving everything coated in a fresh layer of acidic snow that's already eating through the metal fixtures outside. But it's what's happening below the surface that should concern you most. There's a war being fought in the tunnels and bunkers beneath our feet. I discovered this 3 weeks ago when I detected unusual radio chatter on the emergency frequencies. Military-style communications using codes I hadn't heard since the early days after the fall. At first, I thought it might be remnants of organized government forces, some shadow of official authority trying to restore order. I was wrong. What I found was something much worse. Organized factions fighting over the last habitable spaces on Earth. The conflict started in the major cities, where networks of tunnels, subways, and utility corridors create vast underground territories. Groups that began as simple survivor communities have evolved into militarized forces, each claiming sovereignty over sections of the buried world. They've drawn maps with borders, established checkpoints, created entire governments based on the control of tunnels and bunkers. The largest faction calls itself the Iron Republic. They've claimed the old subway system of what used to be New York, turning abandoned train stations into fortified bases and train tunnels into patrol routes. Their leader, someone known only as the Governor, broadcasts propaganda on multiple frequencies, promising security and stability to anyone willing to submit to their authority. But submission comes at a terrible price. The Iron Republic operates on a caste system where your value is determined by your usefulness to their war effort. Engineers and doctors are treated as nobility, given the best food and safest shelters. Manual laborers are expendable, worked until they collapse and then cast out into the dead zones. Children are raised as soldiers from birth, knowing nothing but military discipline and absolute obedience. I intercepted one of their recruitment transmissions last week. The voice was smooth, professional, almost hypnotic in its certainty. Citizens of the wasteland, it began, why struggle alone in the darkness when you could join a thriving civilization? The Iron Republic offers food, shelter, medical care, and protection from the chaos above. All we ask in return is your loyalty and your service to the greater good. What they don't mention in these broadcasts is the initiation process. New recruits are forced to participate in raids against other settlements, to prove their commitment by participating in acts of violence against fellow survivors. Those who refuse are marked as traitors and executed publicly as examples to others. Their main enemy is the Tunnel Collective, a loose alliance of smaller groups that control the utility networks beneath what used to be Chicago. Where the Iron Republic operates like a military dictatorship, the Collective has organized as a confederation of independent cells, each specializing in different aspects of underground survival. The Collective intercepted my radio signals 2 weeks ago. Their communication came through on a frequency I thought was dead, coded in a language that took me hours to decipher. When I finally translated it, the message was both an invitation and a warning. Free broadcaster, you speak truth in a world of lies. Join us in the deep places, or beware the iron fist that seeks to silence all independent voices. The war between these factions has turned the underground into a maze of contested territories, no man's lands, and shifting alliances. They fight with weapons salvaged from military depots, with homemade explosives crafted from industrial chemicals, with psychological warfare that would make the old world's intelligence agencies proud. Last month, the Iron Republic launched what they called Operation Sunburst, an assault on 3 collective strongholds simultaneously. The attack involved flooding tunnel sections with toxic gas, forcing defenders to choose between suffocation and surrender. The Collective retaliated by sabotaging the Republic's water filtration systems, introducing hallucinogenic compounds that drove entire outposts into madness. But it's not just these 2 major powers. Smaller factions control strategic resources throughout the underground networks. The Rust Lords have claimed the old industrial tunnels where geothermal vents provide heat and power. They've become arms dealers, trading weapons and ammunition for food and medical supplies. Their workshops echo with the sound of hammers on metal, crafting increasingly sophisticated tools of destruction. The Water Wardens control the pumping stations and treatment facilities that keep the underground communities alive. They've remained neutral in the larger conflict, but they exact tribute from anyone who wants access to clean water. Cross them, and your settlement dies of thirst within days. Most terrifying are the deep dwellers, who've claimed the lowest levels of the underground networks. They've been down there so long, they've forgotten what the surface looks like. Generations of people, born and raised in total darkness. They've developed their own language, their own customs, their own twisted culture, based on the worship of machinery and the fear of light. The deep dwellers trade with the surface factions, but their prices are always paid in people. They take prisoners, volunteers, anyone desperate enough to venture into their territory. What happens to these people is unclear, but the few who've escaped speak of vast machine cities powered by human labor, of rituals conducted around massive boilers and generators, of children raised in the dark who've never heard the sound of wind or rain. I learned about their existence when I intercepted a trade negotiation between them and the Iron Republic. The Republic was offering 20 prisoners in exchange for industrial-grade pumps and filtration equipment. The Deep Dweller representative spoke in a voice that sounded like it had been damaged by years of breathing machine oil and metal dust. 20 souls for the deep places, the voice rasped through static and interference. They will serve the great engines, feed the hungry machines. In return, we grant you the tools to claim more territory, to harvest more souls for future trades. The prisoner exchange took place in what used to be Grand Central Station, now a bombed-out ruin that serves as neutral ground between territories. I watched through binoculars from a concealed position as Republic soldiers herded chained prisoners toward figures in environmental suits so bulky they barely looked human. The prisoners were all young, all healthy, all terrified. What haunts me most is that some of the prisoners weren't captured enemies. They were Republic citizens who had committed minor infractions, speaking against the governor, questioning orders, expressing doubt about the war. The Iron Republic had turned its own people into currency, trading human lives for military advantage. The underground war has created an economy based entirely on suffering. Territory is measured in kilometers of tunnel controlled. Wealth is calculated in weapons stockpiled and slaves captured. Power is determined by how much pain you can inflict on your enemies while protecting your own people from similar fates. These factions have communication networks that span continents, trade routes that connect underground communities from coast to coast. They've built an entire shadow civilization in the ruins of our old infrastructure, complete with currencies, legal systems, and diplomatic protocols. But it's a civilization built on the foundation of endless conflict, where peace is seen as weakness and compassion is a luxury no one can afford. The war has reached the point where neutral settlements are being forced to choose sides. You're either with the Iron Republic, allied with the Tunnel Collective, paying tribute to one of the smaller factions, or you're marked for conquest. Independence is no longer an option in the underground world. I received a transmission yesterday that chilled me more than any winter wind. It was broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously, a coordinated message that required sophisticated equipment and careful planning. The voice was calm, authoritative, speaking with the confidence of someone who believes victory is inevitable. To all independent operators, isolated settlements, and unaffiliated survivors, the message began. The time of chaos is ending. The underground territories are being unified under proper authority. You have 72 hours to declare allegiance to a recognized faction or face the consequences of continued lawlessness. The message was signed the Council of Deep Territories, representing what appears to be a new alliance between the major factions. They've decided to stop fighting each other and turn their attention to eliminating independent survivors like us. The war between factions is evolving into a war against freedom itself. But here's what gives me hope. The very fact that they feel the need to make such ultimatums means they haven't won yet. There are still enough free settlements, enough independent voices, enough uncontrolled territory to threaten their vision of total dominance. We're not conquered yet, and as long as we maintain our independence, we represent an alternative to their brutal order. I want you to listen carefully to your radio frequencies. Monitor the chatter, learn the codes, understand the territories. Knowledge is the only weapon we have against the forces that would enslave us. Stay free, stay hidden, and remember, in their world, you're either a ruler or a resource. Don't let them make that choice for you. This is David, signing off from day 2190. The war may be coming for us, but we're not defenseless. This is David, day 2191 since the sky closed. The atmospheric readings have been fluctuating wildly for the past week, and I think I know why. Something new is happening to our world, something that makes the nuclear winter seem like just the beginning of our troubles. If you're listening from anywhere near the old coastal regions, you need to hear this. Your life may depend on understanding what's coming. They started appearing 6 months ago, weather phenomena unlike anything recorded in human history. We call them crimson storms, and they're turning the already deadly surface world into something that defies comprehension. These aren't normal weather patterns. They're atmospheric anomalies created by the interaction between nuclear fallout, climate disruption, and chemical reactions that weren't supposed to be possible on Earth. The first one I witnessed formed over what used to be the Atlantic seaboard. I was monitoring weather satellites, the few that still function, when I noticed an unusual spiral pattern appearing in the cloud formations. At first, it looked like a normal storm system, the kind we use to track with simple meteorological equipment. But as it developed, the clouds began to change color. What started as the familiar gray overcast of our permanent winter slowly shifted to deep burgundy, then to the bright red of fresh blood. The spiral tightened, moving faster than any natural storm should be able to rotate. Within 6 hours, it had grown to cover an area larger than most countries, with wind speeds that exceeded anything ever recorded. But the wind wasn't the dangerous part. As the Crimson Storm moved inland, it began to rain. Not the acidic precipitation we've grown accustomed to, but something far worse. The rain was thick, viscous, and when it hit the ground, it began to dissolve everything organic. Plants that had somehow survived the nuclear winter withered and died within minutes of contact. The few animals still clinging to life in the area fled screaming, their fur and skin burning where the red rain touched them. I watched through high-powered binoculars from a safe distance as the storm passed over an abandoned city. The rain ate through wooden structures like acid, dissolved fabric and paper, and anything that had once been alive, but it didn't affect metal or concrete or glass. The storm was somehow selectively destroying organic matter while leaving inorganic materials completely untouched. The chemical analysis equipment I salvaged from a university laboratory confirmed my worst fears. The red rain contained compounds that shouldn't exist in nature, complex organic acids that seemed designed to break down biological matter at the molecular level. Somehow, the chemical chaos in our atmosphere had created a form of precipitation that was actively hostile to life itself. But that was just the beginning. As I continued to monitor the storm's path, I discovered that the Crimson Storms were following patterns. They weren't random weather events. They were targeting specific areas with an almost intelligent precision. Areas where infrared satellites detected heat signatures indicating human activity. Areas where radio transmissions suggested the presence of survivor settlements. The second storm I observed formed over the ruins of what used to be Denver. I had been tracking radio signals from that region for weeks, evidence of a thriving underground community that had managed to maintain contact with other settlements across the continent. Their transmissions stopped abruptly when the Crimson Storm arrived. When it passed, the satellite images showed nothing but empty ruins and red-stained ground. I tried to contact them for days afterward, broadcasting on every frequency they had used. Nothing but static answered me. Eventually, a faint transmission came through, a single voice, barely human, repeating the same phrase over and over. The sky bleeds and we burn. The sky bleeds and we burn. The transmission lasted 3 hours before it too fell silent. The storms have been increasing in frequency and intensity. What started as isolated phenomena are now occurring weekly, sometimes multiple storms forming simultaneously across different continents. They seem to be learning, adapting, becoming more efficient at targeting and destroying human settlements. Last month, I intercepted communications from one of the Iron Republic outposts. They had developed a theory about the storms that horrified me more than anything I'd heard about the underground war. According to their scientists, the Crimson Storms weren't natural phenomena at all. They were artificial weather systems, created by some kind of atmospheric manipulation technology that had been activated by the nuclear explosions. The theory suggests that one of the old world's governments had developed weather control weapons, systems designed to create localized climate disasters as tools of warfare. When the nuclear exchange occurred, these systems were either automatically activated by the destruction or accidentally triggered by electromagnetic pulses. Now they operate without human control, following programming that identifies signs of human activity and eliminates them. Whether this theory is correct or not, the practical effect is the same. The Crimson Storms represent a new level of threat that makes survival exponentially more difficult. They can form with little warning, move faster than any evacuation could manage, and destroy settlements that have survived everything else this dead world has thrown at them. But here's the truly terrifying part. Survivors who've been exposed to the red rain and live to tell about it report strange side effects. Not just the obvious chemical burns and tissue damage, but neurological changes that develop over weeks and months after exposure. Memory loss, hallucinations, and progressive paranoia that eventually leads to complete psychological breakdown. I met one such survivor 3 days ago. She had escaped from a settlement hit by a crimson storm 2 months earlier, one of only 5 people who made it to safety before the red rain began. When I found her, she was wandering through the ruins, talking to people who weren't there, arguing with voices only she could hear. She told me about the storm with perfect clarity, describing details that matched everything I had observed through satellite feeds and atmospheric monitoring. But between these moments of lucidity, she would suddenly start screaming about red spiders crawling under her skin, or about voices in the rain telling her to find other survivors and bring them back to the storm. The chemical compounds in the red rain don't just destroy organic matter, they alter it. They create changes in brain chemistry that turn survivors into unwitting agents of the storms themselves. People exposed to the red rain develop an irresistible compulsion to seek out other humans, to gather them together in large groups that become easier targets for the next storm. This discovery has forced me to question every transmission I receive, every survivor I encounter. Are they genuine human beings trying to maintain contact and community? Or are they victims of the red rain, following chemical programming that turns them into bait for the next crimson storm? The paranoia is becoming overwhelming. Yesterday, I received a transmission from someone claiming to be organizing a large survivor gathering, a conference where isolated communities could coordinate resources and mutual defense. The location they provided was perfect, a large valley with multiple shelter options and good radio reception. But it's also exactly the kind of target the Crimson Storms seem to prefer. I've started developing protocols for detecting red rain exposure in radio communications. Certain speech patterns, repeated phrases, obsessive focus on gathering people together, these might be signs that the person transmitting has been chemically compromised. But the terrifying reality is that there's no way to be certain without direct contact, and direct contact risks exposure to whatever influence they might be carrying. The weather monitoring equipment shows another storm system forming over the Pacific. The spiral pattern is already beginning to show the telltale color shift from gray to burgundy. If the pattern holds, it will make landfall in approximately 72 hours, somewhere along what used to be the California coast. I've been trying to warn the settlements in that area, broadcasting storm warnings on every frequency I can access. Some respond, acknowledging the alert and confirming their preparations for shelter. Others don't respond at all, and I don't know if that's because they didn't receive the message or because they're no longer capable of responding. The Crimson Storms have added a new dimension to survival that goes beyond finding food and shelter and avoiding human predators. Now we have to contend with weather that actively hunts us, precipitation that rewrites our brain chemistry, and the constant uncertainty about whether the people we're trying to help are still truly human. But I'm still broadcasting, still monitoring, still trying to maintain some semblance of human communication network. Because if we let fear completely isolate us, if we stop reaching out to each other entirely, then the storms will have achieved their purpose even without directly targeting us. They'll have turned us into solitary creatures hiding in holes, no longer capable of the cooperation and community that makes us human. The atmospheric readings are shifting again. Another storm system forming, this one closer than I'd like.